Hi there, my name is Lila Crow and I'm the Executive Director of the Itasca County Historical Society. And once again, we're hoping that you'll join with us to review a little bit of history. Today we are going to do a program called Women of Yesteryear, and not in particular of the first women, what we would call first women of everything, first white woman, first white child. That's not necessarily what we're going to do today. We're just going to tell you a story of what we've come up with in the history of women in Itasca County. First of all, we want to tell you where we are located. We are at 201 North Pekegama Avenue. If you come down Pekegama Avenue, you just can't miss us because our building is brand new, fresh, has big windows, and hopefully we can tell a little bit of what's going on at the Historical Society. So in telling this story, we're going to take you all the way back to when Grand Rapids and Itasca County started in 1891. This first picture that you look at is one of the oldest pictures that we have in our collection. It has a spray of the falls, and this picture came to us approximately 3 years ago. It actually has a story to tell itself. It has men, women, and of course the American Indian, dirt everywhere. You can tell that the trees around have been cut down, and that this, I could say, is probably after quite a bit of logging has been done in this area, because we know, as everybody and what's documented, is that this area was covered with the white pine trees. When I first took over my job back in 2000, we found a box, and it was an archival box. So it was very nice, big black box. Open it up, and inside the box was a photo album. Now, if you've been to your grandparents' homes, sometimes you'll find an old photo album. It feels like it has velvet on the outside, and you open it up and has gold trimmed pictures in it. These are one of the earliest photo albums. Well, this one here happened to be the Mather collection. These are the oldest known pictures that we have of Grand Rapids, and it's a collection. There's approximately 50 pictures, and we're going to show you one of the first ones. This picture here is of the school that was located where Old Central School is today. This is the original schoolhouse of Grand Rapids. Very stately building. This was moved over to Cohasset, and then Old Central School was built in 1895. If you look at the picture, it's blue. Almost all the pictures in that collection had the blue hue to them, but because the album had been kept in the dark, all the pictures are very pristine. This here was one of the first churches in this area, the first Presbyterian church. And in this location that you're looking at right now would be where the Hopperton store was in your memory today. It's the stained glass shop, better known as the McGrosty Art Building, was right there on that corner. The next one that you see is the original Catholic Church, which today is being made into apartment buildings. If you go right past Grand Rapids State Bank, that is where that church was located. It did burn down, and they rebuilt the church. This one here is all wood. When they rebuilt it, then it was built with the brick. This is the original Pekegama building. So if you look at it today, you go, well, that doesn't look like Pekegama Hotel. Well, it burned down in 1893. This picture was taken before, and they do have a picture of the building burning itself. So it was a massive big fire, totally made out of wood. And it was really actually a very nice looking building. That corner view would have been just excellent. And everything that it points to in that particular street would have been Main Street. We changed to 4th Avenue years later, which is today where Highway 2 and 169 is. But 3rd Avenue actually was the main street for many, many years, going east to west. North to south, right past Pekegama, was what was known as Whiskey Row. So our building today, the Old Corcoran building, was at one time a hotel, had a bar in it, and there was several bars down that street. Women were not allowed to go down Whiskey Row. That was a taboo for them when they first came to town. They would get off the train and make sure to either go to Pekegama Hotel or to the Gladstone Hotel. You weren't allowed to go down any one street. The next picture you see is the interior of the Beckfeld Mather store. Mather was the name of the collection that we had, and Mather and Beckfeld worked together for many, many years, and they were the retailers here. So looking at that picture, that's the first picture of an inside of a store. And honestly, if you look at that, they had some really, really neat goods that came into this community. And of course, now it's starting to grow. They are going to build a big, huge school. There is more than 300 people in town, and not only do the steamships bring up supplies, but now they're coming in by train. This here, it just, and the writing below these pictures was excellent. This is very blurry, but in order to take that picture inside, inside of a location, back then pictures, it took about 30 seconds to take a picture. So if you look at old pictures and you go, nobody's ever smiling. Well, in order to have a picture taken and hold a smile for 30 seconds, just try it sometime. It is really, really hard. So most baby pictures, when they're really, really in the late 1800s, were blurry because you couldn't hold that child for 30 seconds. This was really cool when we looked at the pictures, and it's a picnic. I mean, who would have thought a picnic back in those days? I mean, to me, it's modern picnic. You have a picnic table, you have the lake, you go swimming, and this was right out in the middle of the woods. They just, looks like they just sat down, opened up a basket, and started eating. Kind of sophisticated. The men are in suits, and of course, everybody had hats back then. That's kind of pretty cool. And this was the Mather family photo. And you'll see just a little bit of blurriness for the kids because I have a feeling that they moved, especially the one, if you're looking at the picture and to the right, the little boy, he looks like he must have moved his head quite a bit. But we always look at what they wear, the style. This one here, you're real fortunate to be able to see that they had shoes, which a lot of pictures never showed the feet. So when we look at pictures, we look at everything, the background, the backdrop, the carpeting. Had carpeting on the floor. So I would say right now that being a store owner, that they would have been more of what we would call the upper crust of the community, that they obviously had money. This one here was so neat because they're outside and they're peeling potatoes, vegetables. Look at how white their aprons are. And of course the hair always up, always back. They didn't wear it down long. It was always in braids or tied back. And we always look at the building, what's around them. The basket that's behind her, that is really neat. We actually have one similar to that in our collection. So looking at this picture here can talk 1,000 words. This one here was different because she's standing right next to a window where obviously you can tell that the light is coming in, and it looks like she might be, what we surmise, looking at a recipe maybe. But then we were told, well, they didn't really have recipes back then. They always put a pinch of this and a pinch of that and mix whatever they had up. So we're really not quite sure what she's reading at that point because obviously they're doing something with cooking, and that one you could just imagine guess. I really think the lady standing there with the polka dotted outfit, that is so cool because you just didn't see things like that back then. It's like, whoa, this is really neat. This is really cool. This was our fair. Now, can you just imagine in the summertime getting all of your vegetables all together? The pumpkins were huge. A couple of these vegetables, we just didn't know what they were, trying to figure out. And then, of course, in the back, you see the quilts hanging. So you know that the women had done some quilting and they had their quilts on display. And this is in 1894. Just imagine. The electricity had just started. They were just getting lights in. And then to take a picture. This people don't remember because, of course, it didn't last that long. This is where the fair was. That previous picture, all the walls were up at that time, but it was a pavilion. If you were to imagine today on the Mississippi River, it would have been across from a little ways down further from the library because the bank is not that big, but it was across the Mississippi. It's on the south side of the river. Sailboating. Oh my, we have a lot of sailboat pictures. From back then, Pekegama Lake was the sailboat place to be. Ogama, which was a hotel out where our golf course is now, Ogama was there. That was a motel that burned down, but that's where people that lived in Grand Rapids would go out to Ogama, stay overnight there. They felt like they were a long ways from town on the lake, did a lot of sailboating. I just can't imagine it. I mean, there was children. There's no life jackets. And you just kind of like, oh my goodness. So we're getting into a little bit more of the way women dressed, what they did. This was part of that sailing party that went out. And there's no swimsuits here, but we do have some pictures a little bit later of swimsuits. They were made out of wool. I can't possibly imagine swimming. We had what we call bicycle clubs back then, and we're still trying to figure out how the women could ride those bicycles, because look at those bicycles. They're like halfway up on a waist. How in the world could they, you know, the waist of the men, they're so tall, and the women had long skirts on, but they obviously rode their bicycles. I can't imagine. This was in the 1893, 1894, and very heavy duty bicycles. But people love to look at these kind of pictures. Those bicycles were, I would say, top of the line back in that time. That's pretty cool. We have a couple of pictures of logging. Not very many had women in them. This one here was taken over near Swan Lake, near what we call today the Pingilly area, and of course dressed very warmly. You know, this winter has been really tough on us. I can't imagine what it was like back then, but that logging camp was famous for what they did. Now we're going to tell you a story about a lady. She was, her name was Catherine Lent. She was the first white woman to actually stay in Grand Rapids. There were several that came to this area and then they took off again. This was the first state bank, which in looking at our streets today, it would be, we know it was on First Avenue, and this was her second location, I believe, because it would be the empty parking lot next to Janicki Bakery. So if you're thinking that way, if you look at it, her millinery shop was the second part of that building. So if you're looking at it, be on the right. Catherine Lent came to town and let everybody know that she was a widow and had 2 little girls. So right away, I think she got the sympathy of the community. Here was a widow raising 2 little girls. She had money. She started her own millinery shop. It wasn't until we did some investigating and found out later that she was actually a divorcee. Had come here to this community, and it sounds like maybe during the settlement or whatever, she got some money, came to town and had the millinery shop, and then upstairs she had the mortuary. So this is what I tell people. She was a power horse here. If you read the Herald Review and what's in the Herald Review, her name is brought up a lot. So here's a group of women, and if looking at it, she is the one that's on the left standing up in the white dress from head to toe. She was a stately woman. She wasn't petite or tiny. But in the Herald Review, she was everywhere. At all the meetings and whenever the women got together and did stuff, Catherine Lent was there. The rest of the women, they were called by their husband's name, like Mrs. John Smith, Mrs. Harold. I mean, all of them had their husband's name except Catherine. So when we look in the paper, it's always Catherine. Now, she had the women's ear because she had a millinery shop. And she actually traveled out of this community quite a bit to make sure that she got her goods from where she needed to make these hats. And this is just a sample of the style. They said that when she had that shop, some of the women going out the door actually had to turn their head and walk out sideways because their hats were so big. But when they came in to get their hats, she listened to everything they said because she knew who was doing what and where all the time. So, and then she had a mortuary. So then she was with people, you know, when their husbands passed away, or she knew everything that was going on in this community. So I could say involved in government. She couldn't run for a political office. She couldn't even vote. But Catherine was a force to be dealt with, and she made sure that in this community we were taken care of, that when they had meetings about the streets, she was there, about the sidewalks, everything. Catherine was there to put her 2 cents in. We just wanted to show another example. These women have beautiful hats on and the muffs, so you know it was taken in the wintertime. It was very cold. And actually, they would have been really good this year. Have your hands in some muffs, keeps you really warm. But the hats were gorgeous. Very stylish here within our community. Now we're going to continue on and show you a little bit more of what we would consider the women in our community being farmers' wives, being the one that took care of the home, known in that part for the men of the village. This is a very rare, another rare picture taken of the inside of a home. And the photographer, that, as far as I could tell, a woman actually even took the picture. She is reflected in the glass in the back of the china cabinet, and she's taken this picture. The gentleman, it looks like it would be like an afternoon tea. There's not any dinner plates. It's more of a teacup, maybe an afternoon social time that was there. Plants, you know, by the window, normal things that you see. We just love the clock. To me, that's the most unique clock, because back then in those days they had the chime that went back and forth. To have it exposed like that, that was a pretty cool clock. Women were involved in everything to do with your children. So in this one here was like a club. It would be similar to a 4-H club today. They were all dressed up nice and neat, and here they are dressed and standing in the middle of the woods, which to me was like, wow. We will show you some ragamuffins later. Most women learned how to shoot back then too. Had a gun, they could shoot. We have several pictures of women that were either on a hunt or were like this one, had her gun so that if he was out doing his job, logging, or even the miners that left, the women could defend themselves. They're very well known for that. This lady, her name was Amy Porter, and this was her graduation dress. She made it for $2. Boy, if you were to think about that today, to make your clothes and to be able to spend $2 on it today, that would be like a very expensive dress. $2 was quite a bit of money back then. We used to have Miss Itasca. We would have different communities have queens. Miss Grand Rapids, Miss Pingilly, Miss Nashwauk, and they would compete. A lot of times we had competitions like in the late 50s, early 60s, and beautiful women that would compete for those. And they did the normal things that you do today, not only for their outfits, for their talent. So all of those things combined. We had one actually get up as high as runner-up for Miss Minnesota, came from Grand Rapids, and she graduated, I believe, in 1977. Her last name was Swinson. That's the one that we have that went probably the furthest of all of the ones running for there. This one here is so cute. Can you imagine? That's just the weirdest looking wheelbarrow, but fun to play on it, boy. And look at those shoes. Just imagine you had to take a tool just to button them up. That would have been so cool. Isn't this just adorable? Now, we figured out this one here was a female. A lot of the pictures back then, a lot of the boys, they would dress with whatever they had the fanciest of. And a lot of people just assumed that little boys would be dressed in pants and a shirt. And sometimes we've had to figure it out, gone back on Ancestry.com to find out what age the kids were and to get as much detail as we can about them. Isn't this neat? Sophistication to a T. Beautiful clothes, and the style of the hair back then. That background actually was used many, many, many times in what we would consider today, if you remember the studio, Camacraft, Stitch Studio. This here was way back then, and that background was used for many, many, many years here. It just was one of those that they purchased and then it just kept going. We love these pictures. Oh my goodness. Now, first of all, if you look at the roof, tar paper shack is what we would call it. And obviously wintertime, there's no snow on the top, but if you look at the ground, to us there's snow, but not that much. But we're still trying to figure out, the snow is just down at the very edge of the roof. But they're not dressed really for wintertime, but warm, you might say. And the lady is sitting there with a very long dress. This one here says it's 1909. I can just imagine that this cabin would have been a long ways from here. I mean, it says Deer River, Minnesota, but Deer River covers a lot of area. And I can imagine that she would probably be one of those skilled at weapons in the middle of nowhere. Back then, there was a lot of animals. We have stories of the American Indian not being cruel, but in a way, white people more fearful that they would have been. But in all that we have in our records, there was always a fear, but most of them could communicate some way. Not until years later did they learn a lot of English. This was another one of the lady before she was dressed, and then this here's a closer up version of her. Look at this young lady. Isn't this just cool? We always look at everything. So the chair obviously would have been for a gentleman that would be in a family grouping. Her shoes are very fancy. Her hair piece, something similar to what we would consider wearing a hat. The young ladies that went out always did up their hair. There wasn't any flyaway. And for her to hold a book, though, that to us was real rare. We don't see that very often. So we're not quite sure what that would represent. If it was her first communion or something to do with school, that's what we surmise on that one. She wore tights, and that was also a rarity back then. Here's what is a first communion, and that was, you had an honorary to take that picture. Isn't that just beautiful? Ha! Doesn't this look like fun? It wouldn't happen today, let me tell ya. This was in Old Central School, and they had a swing set and a teeter-totter right in the classroom. And they obviously took turns, but the little girls, little short dresses, little boys. Of course, Central School had the farmers that would come in from the country. Everybody walked to school when they came in. In the wintertime, they would have hot potatoes in their pockets to keep their fingers warm. And some of them would actually have that potato for their lunch if it was too cold to run back home again to eat lunch. So kind of some of those stories that come from Central School. If you look to the left, that's a big, huge heater. Those big metal heaters that produced a lot of heat. And of course, this had to have been in the wintertime. They had to have something to do. Isn't that just cool? Here's another one. This might be what you call the little ragamuffins, but in actuality, even though they don't have shoes, little boys, all barefoot, that wagon is just so cute. Mom is sitting there. I'm just assuming that she would have taken a break from her busy day. Is 4 children to raise. The little girl, obviously, she knew she was going to have pictures taken. They dressed her up just a little bit. But also the log cabin behind, laundry hanging, you know, busy all the time. 1907, I believe. It could be 1904, but 1904, 7, somewhere around in there. Minnesota Normal School. We had a school here that would teach women to be teachers. And Minnesota Normal School, you had to be at least 8th grade level to go to the school, and single. We also found out that in early 1900s, Judge Twing, known years later, met Maddie, who was a teacher at Central School. She had gone to a normal school in the Aiken area, had come up here. She met Judge and fell in love, and they got married. And when she got married, they told her that she could no longer be a teacher. Oh, was she mad? You would not believe. We have these little articles in the newspaper of how upset she was, because she was actually one of the favorite teachers at Central School. In the middle of the winter time, she would have a picnic for the kids and actually saved ants from the summertime so they could actually experience a whole picnic. But she made it her goal in life to change that law in the state of Minnesota. When she married the judge, he was a senator. He represented our county as a Republican senator for a couple of years. Further on in his career, became a judge. And her name is on some of the original papers in the state of Minnesota to change the law so that married women could continue to be teachers. She never did go back to schooling when she had her two sons. One was severely handicapped, so she had to stay home with him, but her goal in life was to make it so that women could teach. So that was one of those little tidbit stories from Itasca County that we worked really hard in this area to have single women or married women to be able to be teachers. Kind of proud of that fact. We have lots of pictures of different vocations that women had. A lot of them went into what we would consider the teaching skills and secretary skills. The original courthouse had a lot of women that worked. The stories that would come from the women that worked in the courthouse before it was torn down, that they would come in and the cracks on the walls would be bigger and bigger because the original courthouse was actually sinking in the ground. It was not built on a stable ground. So if you go to the courthouse today and go downstairs in the lunchroom, you can see some original pictures of that courthouse. It was a very unique building, and it looks similar to what Central School looks like today. Here's another family picture. Isn't this just beautiful? Everybody is dressed up to go to Sunday school. Beautiful picture. Everybody's serious. Remember, you couldn't move, so you had to hold your facial expression very solemn. Oh, we put some fun pictures in here because people had fun back then. I mean, everybody thinks it's like work, work, work. But in actual, we found quite a few pictures where not only the picnics and the sailing and things to do, but that everybody had what I consider downtime. And even in those stringent times, they did that. Winter picture, beautiful hat. Oh my goodness. The feathers that come from there. What we look at too is the buildings behind. She obviously is not on a main street. This would be in a community around here, and they do have electricity though, because you can see a light pole back there. Just some fun pictures. We just kind of want to go through a couple here slowly so you can see. They're just having a great time. We look at everything when they do this. I look at the guy that's standing there taking the picture, and I bet you he just loved to do this. It's like, okay. And hats, everybody wore hats, long skirts. So we're looking here at, I would say, if I was to guess the style, I would say more late 20s, early 30s. This is one of the first pictures that we have of one of the women with their hair down. Normally it doesn't occur then, so the one on the right, you see that her hair is very long, almost to her waist, and very rare that we would even get a picture like that. Just not even considered. And of course the men having their hats on. Boy. This here was from like a boarding house. Back then, a lot of people, if you were in the country, and like the Smith House, that was really well known. The Smith House, she would at some points have 14 to 20 people that would be going from here up to Big Fork and have to have a place to stay because it took them more than a day to get to Big Fork. Now it's like an hour. You know, it's 45 minutes to an hour to go the 50 miles up there. But back then, they were on horseback buggies. They would stay. This is a typical woman that always wore an apron, so I would assume that she would have been the cook, took care of people, the boarders that would come through, log buildings behind, a lot of chinking you could see on these buildings. And this went away from like the tar roof. I would say this one here looked more like a metal roof, but you know, we're always guessing on that, so we can't positively say. Oh, this is that one where the girl has the long hair. I'm sorry, it got messed up. This is an awesome picture. It's a group and a family setting. So if we were to look at this, it would be like a family reunion. And today, you know, there's lots and lots of people at family reunion. And the honorary guests usually were sitting, in almost all of ours with the family group, the oldest were seated in the picture. So this would be probably great grandma and grandpa that would be there. Remember, in pretty much, I would say in the early years, the women got married quite young. And so for them to be a great grandma or grandpa, they could be a great grandma in their middle 50s. Not surprising that they would be that way. One of the group pictures that you could tell they were at a family event because they're not wearing their hats. They're not wearing what we would consider the out and about town kind of thing. So in looking at this picture, they would have probably just got done eating and somebody said, okay, we need to take a family group picture. Very orderly is what you could call this picture. We wanted to put some pictures in to show the different styles. This one here, the dresses are getting shorter and different ways in which you wore. This would be in the 40s. And the hat, he took off his hat for the picture, which is really good because then you can see their features. But they're actually going out of the style of hats. This was getting towards that time when you just didn't wear those big, huge hats with all the feathers on. We were fortunate in this area to have several women that served in the military. So if you're studying during the military times, World War II especially, we know that a lot of women, and not only did you recycle everything, I mean, we don't even recycle today like what they did back then, but a lot of women had to take on the men's jobs. So many men were called in the military, and we still had to get things done. So Millie the Miner is a big story around this area, where the pictures that we have of her going with the women down into the mines, wearing their mining hat with the lights on their heads and going forward. But there was a lot that served within the military themselves. So we try to tell that story here because we have had several women that it was kind of like unspoken back then that would serve in the military. Weddings. Weddings are very important to women, even from way, way back. Our earliest wedding dress that we have right now is from the 1800s, and it will be in a tea party coming up soon, so we can show the decade of wedding dresses. So in our collection at the Historical Society, we have a lot that have wedding dresses. There was a wedding dress shop here for about 30 years where she designed and made wedding dresses. This one in particular was made by Lee Weller, was her name. But she always told the brides when they came in to get their dresses that her prettiest design of the wedding dress was the back. And even today people are like, the back? Well, when she walked up the aisle, pretty much what people saw was the back of the dress. During the wedding, during even the dancing, you put your dress up in the back. So her design, simple pretty much in the front, but the back had beautiful designs to it. This dress will be one that will be on display during that program too. Of course you can tell it's the 70s. Look at those hats. Boy, purple, big color back then. We wanted to show a little bit more modern. This here happened to be during a celebration at Central School. You see the old Central School there. And Agnes Ryla and Catherine Anderson. She was a school teacher for many, many, many years. And they were doing some fundraising for the Historical Society, and of course Agnes had